Okay, so we're about 4 miles into the green swamp, and we are trying to find the old abandoned Stewart Homestead cabin. It's like an old abandoned cabin, and there's a story with it that we'll tell when we get there. So here's Tiffany and Brooke here, taking a little break. Quiet out here, mid-February. Surprisingly warm, but there's a nice breeze. Really nobody out here. Okay, so about 4.5 miles in, the trail ended, but according to GPS, which is kind of spotty, we can pick up one of the trails. We think it's the Florida Scenic Trail right through here. We're trying to find it now. It's been raining the last couple days, a lot of rain for mid-February in Florida. It's about 75 degrees out, no sun. So we'll keep you posted. So the way that we went was not the right way. We were about 5 miles in and we just reached kind of a floodplain. There's no way we could cross it. So we're hiking back towards Rock Ridge Road now, and we're actually going to go try to find another entrance to see if we can find this Stewart Homestead and this old cabin. Definitely getting some steps in. All right, so we are now 11.5 miles in. So basically we went about 5.25 miles straight into the Hampton tract. Straight in and right back out. Like I said, we got blocked by a floodplain on the ridge, so we're trying to find another entrance in here. If you're not familiar with Green Swamp, it's just under 50,000 acres. There's multiple ways to gain entry. So we're going to try another way in to try to find this Stewart Homestead. Okay, so we are back to try to continue our adventure to find the Stewart Homestead. This is actually a different entrance for the east track of the Green Swamp Wilderness Preserve off of Rock Ridge Road here. And we think that we have found the path that's going to lead us to this cabin. Okay, so short hike in, you're going to pass the Green Swamp Wildlife Management Area, and it's kind of like a checkpoint for people that are hunting out here. There's open hunts in here year-round for hog, white-tailed deer, etc. So this is one of your first stops. Okay, so we're about 1.5 miles into this location of Green Swamp. Pretty thick pine forest here. It's right at about 60 degrees, mid-February. I'm gonna continue moving ahead. So this is pretty representative of natural Florida, and at least as far as central Florida goes, with the saw palmetto, your longleaf pine, and of course a lot of low-lying areas which give it kind of the green swamp designation. But over 100 years ago, as far back as into the 1800s into the early 20th century, there were a lot of people who actually had homesteads out here. There were obviously cattle ranchers that drove cattle across the state of Florida through these regions. And the place we're looking for is the Stewart Homestead, which was built in the late 1800s. And there were many out here, not just that one. So we'll keep on moving through. Okay, so about 2.7 miles in, and this Rock Ridge Road entrance into the Green Swamp, you are going to approach this bridge. So according to the most recent information, we should be a couple of miles away from the site we're trying to find. Okay, just under 3 miles in right now, and we are crossing a third bridge. So right at about 3 miles in, and got lots of, assuming these are parts of the Withlacoochee River that we're crossing over. So the Florida Trail does run through this area, which is a National Scenic Trail. And it's a pretty narrow trail. It goes off the side and kind of traverses and crosses through. Okay, about 4.3 miles in now. Getting closer. Pretty quiet out here. All right, so we're getting closer. And a little update on the story. Over 100 years ago in 1918, two individuals traveled a road very similar to this cabin, and an unspeakable act of murder occurred. So we'll keep you updated. Okay, so we are about 5.5 miles in, and we have found it. They're over at the cabin now. So I'm going to show you this little area here is the cemetery where Mr. and Mrs. Stewart are buried. The state put this up probably about 15 years ago, but there you are, and we'll come back to this little plaque. Stewart Homestead, Mr. and Mrs. Stewart, Isom and Sarah, died in 1918, axe murdered together in their home by Sally's grandson Joshua Browning and his friend John Tucker. So it was an axe murder. Apparently it was a robbery, and they were robbed for $500 and found a week later in that cabin over there in the middle of the Green Swamp. This happened over 100 years ago. All right, so here it is. This apparently is the Stewart cabin. Built in the 1800s. This is in the middle of Green Swamp, and according to the story, and we're assuming this is the cabin, this is where the axe murders occurred, where both Mr. and Mrs. Stewart were murdered over 100 years ago. So just a little bit more on this story. Apparently there were 3 trials that finally tried Sally's grandson and a friend of his. And on the 3rd trial, each of them were convicted of the axe murder and got 10 years for each murder and served 20 years. I'm not sure exactly historically if they served the whole sentence or what happened to the 2 murders, but they got 20 years, 10 for each.